A very good morning to all the participants to this Customs and FTP training program, which is an online learning. We also propose to have a physical program in the coming month. A small background of Hiregange Academy. We were formed in 2014. Mainly, we have provided services in training in the indirect taxes, initially in service tax and then in GST. We've also looked at some training for accountants and in other areas like labor laws and also presentation in English. This particular topic is a 6-day training program in which 4 days we'll be spending on customs and about 1.5 days on FTP. We start with giving a small background of the global trade which is there. What is the importance of various schemes? This will be provided, these insights will be provided by Shri Najib Shah, who is former chairman of Central Board of Excise and Customs, which is now called CBIC. This will be followed by a constitutional and legislative background of customs, the type of duties, key definitions by Mr. B.N. Gururaj, an advocate, who is also credited with writing a number of books. The one in this area is a comprehensive commentary on customs. The legal terms which are important for the understanding of customs and FTP also would be an important aspect, and therefore that is being taken again by an advocate, Mr. K.S. Naveen, who is author of a book called Compendium of Issues and Solutions in GST, and also has been part of the Hiregange Academy from the time of its inception. We follow this with more substantive and detailed understanding of the levy, taxable event, exemptions. How to classify goods in customs is a very important aspect which would be taken by me. The earlier topic of taxable event and levy would be taken by Mr. V. Raghuraman, who is also author of many books in excise and a very well acknowledged GST and IDT principles demystified by analyzing case laws is a wonderful contribution by him. Assessment in customs is very important, and what are the ways in which it can be done practically would be taken by Rajesh Kumar TR, again an author of several books in excise and customs, who is active in the tribunal across the country. The procedures of import and export would be taken by experienced custom house agent and Mr. S.S. Prasad and Mr. Adishesh would be taking you through that. The examination of cargo, the drawal of samples are critical in customs in some cases. This would be taken by Advocate Nassim. The link to GST, which is the largest indirect tax today in India, is very important. This will be taken by CA Rupa Nayak, who is a joint author of a book for CA students, as well as the Central Sales Tax book and several other publications from our office. FEMA has some link to customs as well as FTP, and an understanding of that would be necessary. For this, we'll have CA Vivek Malya, who will share his knowledge. The way in which customs is moving today is to have less and less interaction, more and more IT. Already the bill of entry can be filed in advance. Most of the consignment, most of the transactions which are happening today are online only. We will also see how the post-import audits will be conducted by the department, which could be supported by persons who know customs and FTP. This important subject would be covered by Sri BSP Murthy, who is retired tribunal member of CESTAT and also joint author of a book on audit under GST. At times in case of disputes, you have the settlement commission which needs to be approached. This would be taken by Advocate M.S. Nagaraj, a professional with 30 years experience. Sometimes normal letters, the way we correspond, the way we escalate can be very important in reality. This aspect would be taken by again Mr. BSV Murthy. We come to the FTP part where you have the EOU, the SEZs, which are an important, you can say, part of the custom landscape of India. This would be taken by Sri Jatin Christopher, who is a prolific teacher and also a part of the Indirect Tax Committee, the backbone for a couple of years. One needs to guard against number of errors which can come up in in customs. For this, again, Rajesh Kumar will join you in sharing his knowledge. EOU and SEZ provisions itself require understanding in depth. Mahadev, who is the author of a book on for BCom students on GST, as well as a book on the audit, which I had mentioned earlier, would take us through. Deemed exports, FTP benefits which are there are an area where we may not have too many good speakers. We are lucky to have CMA Prashant Bhatt, who has more than 2 decades of experience in this area. We'll end up with a panel discussion. Now I would take you through what are the opportunities which could be there briefly. All the PPTs and the material would be available for you for downloading also, and therefore you could download it and see it at your leisure. In the advisory, the support services for businesses, how we can make various applications are very important for anybody who starts practice in these areas. The duty drawback is a very important aspect, and more than 50 to 60% of the benefit which comes to the SSE automatically comes through this particular route. There is an all industry rate which is a published rate, and there is also a requirement for registration and filing of returns in this. The drawback for traders is a little different, manufacturers is a little different. For manufacturers, there is a possibility that one may not be happy with the rate which is there in the all industry rate and would like to see that they apply and get the brand rate fixed for them, which possibly could be little higher. When we import goods from related parties, we may have some issues. For example, the valuation issues, where there is a presumption that the price could be colored or reduced. For this, there is an automatic imposition of a special additional duty at the time of import, which is however refundable if one were to prove that it is at arm's length. This is called the special valuation bench, making applications, following up, renewal of the same, closing it. These are all possibilities there. Further advisory and application services could be in setting up private bonded warehouses for manufacture, and also registration under the Authorized Economic Operators Program. If we look at the foreign trade agreements, which a person may be advantaged while importing from countries where such preferential treaties are there, the computation of the value addition for ascertaining the eligibility of the preferential rate itself is a job which needs to be done. Concessions exemptions for imports, concession exemption for exports are areas which are very useful for anybody who is indulging in import and export. The documentation needed to ensure that you don't have any surprises and do not end up with any demands at a later date is very important, and therefore we need to see that documentation is done and it is confirmed periodically. There could be aspects of third party exports, supply to SEZ, special advance authorization schemes for textile industry, which are specific and one could advise and support in those services too. If we were to look at the specific areas in custom, I would say that in the advisory and consultancy, the biggest area could be the classification, possible concessions which are available, which may be subject to conditions and also from places, the exemptions, if any, which are available, the valuation part of it, because customs is based on all the expenses incurred either by the exporter or the importer prior to the import. If we look at exports, huge number of alternate methods of working in exports are there. If we look at job work either being done outside India or in India on behalf of somebody outside India, there are certain ways in which you can work which would reduce your issues. Standard input output norms is something which is very important due to the fact that when you import certain goods for export, what is the quantum which is allowed? What is the scrap percentage, the wastage allowed are aspects which are very important, which also can be fixed. When we look at any transaction is not complete just with exports or with imports. As far as exports are concerned, the input tax credit recoupment or refund is very important. If we look at imports, it would be the other taxes which are applicable, which is IGST and others. Indirect tax is an area where there could be a number of changes which could be in between the year and also with the budget. We have heard even in the recent budget which Finance Minister Piyush Goyal announced, some changes in customs which are to help the Indian industry. The indirect tax law has some interpretational issues in the areas which I talked about, whether it's classification, valuation, or credits, refunds, and landmark judgments in that would be very important. One of the areas, regular areas of work in customs is the obtaining of refunds, which could be something which a person needs to know all the rules and regulations around it and also how to make it practically workable. Sometimes one makes an error. Many times in the case of customs, the decisions are not made by the importer but by the agent who is sitting in the port, who may at times make errors. These errors need to be rectified as early as possible to avoid interest and penal costs. Further specialized area. After one has attained some level of maturity, understanding in the area of customs, the reply to the departmental or revenue letters is very important, cannot be understated. In case there is a show cause notice, then the reply to the show cause notice should be comprehensive. Use of checklists are required. One has to ensure that all the facts are in place. The litigation, the hearing before the adjudicating authority in a simple, persuasive manner is very important for clients to get relief. In case of decisions not coming in favor, Then the reply, that is the appeal at the appellate forums, and the representation for before them could be a bit different from the representation before the adjudicating authority. In India, most of the disputes presently are getting settled at the point of the second appellate forum, which is the tribunal. At times, assistance to lawyers in the High Court and Supreme Court also becomes necessary when the case does not get resolved at tribunal, and in which case, the way in which one can assist the pleading, the replies, the writ, etc., in the High Court or Supreme Court is very important. This also is a very specialized area of service. When we look at foreign trade policy, we would find that it is somewhat similar to our customs in many ways. The advisory, the applications which are needed, support services which are needed, could start with the simple registration of the import export code or amendment to the import export code. These are not very difficult, and hardly any time is taken for such things, but it is required. Export incentives, if we look at, there are schemes which are available, which could be applied as and when they are available. If we look at it for manufacturers or traders, you have a merchandise export from India scheme, which could range from 3% to 7%. At times, there are special additions to the scheme for periods to incentivize exports. The service export from India scheme has seen lesser applications than that which is possible. Many exporters of services are not even aware about this, and this could also be a wonderful area where one could add value to their clients. Getting the export house status depending on the turnover of exports for various categories of industries is also something which is possible. Free sale certificate, which is again an application to be made and obtained, is something important. For the last 2 decades, the advance authorization scheme has been something which has been very useful, where one could import goods based on the fact that they are exporting the goods, applying for a fresh advance authorization, getting the scion fixed if the scion is not reasonable for the client, invalidation of the same so that you can provide the same benefit to an Indian supplier. These are aspects of advance authorization. There are issues in this that once I import something under advance authorization, I am not supposed to use it for domestic consumption. Many people therefore opt for duty-free import authorization scheme, which is post-export. After they export, they get the goods, and then they can deal with them as they want. When we go for any scheme such as when any obligation is there, then extension for the export obligation could also be applied for. As I said earlier, the norms fixation, if one is not happy, could be done. Export obligation, discharge certificate, closure of these authorization, very important, and things should not be left open, as it could again lead to substantial amount of penalties and avoidable costs. The EPCG scheme, Export Promotion Capital Goods Authorization Scheme, is a very popular scheme which is being used by many of the industries in India. Applying for fresh schemes is very important, and many people could use it. Pre and post EPCG, various types are there with different percentages. One could choose the one which is the best. Amendment again to that EPCG scheme or authorization with what one obtains, and extension of the export obligation, which also happens in cases where I have thought that I will be able to export X, but I am able to do only 0.2x or 0.5x, then I need to get the time for export obligation to be extended. Like the earlier advance authorization scheme, the closure of the EPCG scheme is a very important aspect and ensure that one gets a discharge certificate on that. EOUs, EHTPs, BTPs, these are all different types of organizations which have been formed specifically to promote exports, where one could import the capital goods as well as the inputs necessary without paying any customs duty or without paying any IGST. So setting them up, registration, at times I already have one unit, I want to convert it into a EOU. I had a domestic unit which I want to convert to EOU. These conversions are required. Compliances reporting requirements are there. Regular returns have to be filed. Again, norm fixation may be there, especially in regard to the wastages. At times, a EOU scheme does not work too well, and one may like to debond or get out of the EOU scheme, which is also a very good service which one can provide. Deemed exports is export which is not directly out of India but to those who export out of India, and they also have certain benefits for which certain documentation has to be done. The advantages could be in the form of licenses for importing duty free, drawback itself available to the supplier in India who supplies to a person who exports, terminal excise duty benefits which were there earlier when excise duty was there. These are some of the opportunities which I can see in this wonderful area, and not many professionals are there, and I would like to look at one of the ways in which one becomes very successful with the same amount of effort, that is to walk down the less trodden path. These are areas where the number of professionals involved are very less. Those of you who are from industry could do your job much better, your profile can be improved, you could add value to your employers. Those of you who are in practice can add this also to the area of indirect tax practice or other practice which you have. Larger firms could even think of having one dedicated partner for customs and FTP, which would serve the community and serve them as well. Thank you very much for your patient listening. I hope you enjoyed this entire training program, and please feel free to write back to us about what improvements we need to make, or if you're not satisfied about any of the recordings which happen, we would be happy to see what we could do to resolve your issue and continue to provide you services as we have done in the past. Thank you very much.